Hello and welcome to the first part of this series, and I will be using PyCharm throughout the series. And what I've done here is I've actually just created a virtual environment, which if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can just look it up, but nothing to worry about. You can just do it normally as well. You don't need to create a virtual environment, so everything you see here is just created automatically by PyCharm, so nothing to be afraid of. So inside the virtual environment folder, what I'm going to do now is create a new directory, and all our code is just going to go inside this directory. So we don't want to disturb any of this other stuff that's in there. So I'm going to call it main, and inside main I'm going to create a file, a Python file called server. Now, for the client and server interface that we're going to set up for this project, what I'm going to be using is the socket API or the socket library that is part of the standard libraries in Python. So I'm going to import that library, import socket, and next thing I'm going to do is create a socket object for our server. I'm going to call it server socket, server socket equals socket.socket. There's going to be a lot of sockets in this syntax. Another socket.afinet, comma, socket.sockstream. Now, the main thing you need to think about in this whole line is socket.sockstream, which basically means that it's a TCP socket. So this socket object that you just created is a TCP object. I'm going to talk about TCP and UDP afterwards when it becomes more relevant. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to bind it to a port and an IP address. So server socket dot bind so we also need another set of parentheses in here, and in here we're going to say, well, I can directly put my IP address and port in here, but I'm just going to create variables for it. So I'm going to create these two variables. So IP is going to be, so this is going to be a string. That's just, so it basically accepts a string for IP address. So I'm going to be using the local IP address, which is 127.0.0.0, that's all one. And the port we're just going to say is 1234. And bind. I didn't realize that. Just bind. Oops. And next thing we're going to do is actually listen to this port. So we're going to be listening at this port if anything comes in, using the listen function. So now I'm going to create a while true loop, so an infinite while loop. So once we have done all this setting up thing, we're just going to be doing everything else in our loop. So server socket dot we're going to accept connections coming in, so at that port. And what this accept function does is it returns two values. The first one is going to be the client object itself. So the client also is going to have a socket object of itself, just like the server socket object. And when we accept a connection from a client, it actually gives us that socket object, so we can do stuff with it. So I'm going to put an equal sign here and move it over. And then here we're going to say client socket, comma, and the second value that it returns us is the address of the socket. So I'm going to store it in address, just to make sure I haven't messed up the syntax. Yep, it's fine. Okay, so once we have the client socket and the address, well, we can actually just tell our server that we've actually connected to something, and I'll be using an F string to do that, which is basically a better version of something like a format or something that you might have used in previous versions of Python. So I'm going to say address is now connected, and well, we're actually going to use this client socket object to then send any message to this client. So I'm going to say client socket dot send. And before we send anything to a client or anything, we first need to encode our message. So I'll just put another parentheses around the string, and I'm going to say encode encode in UTF-8 format, and that needs to be in parentheses. So let's just put a message. So I'm just going to say, welcome to the dark side. Okay, so that's about it on the server side for now. What I'm going to do so I'm going to create another Python file. I'm going to call it client. I'm going to import socket. Similar sort of stuff here as well. Create a client socket object equals socket dot af inet, comma socket dot sockstream, and so what we need to do now is actually connect to the IP address and the port that the server is actually listening at. So I'm just going to create the IP address and port variable here as well. So IP address is going to be 127.0.0.1, and the port is going to be 1234. And let's just connect to it. Client socket dot connect. Oops, connect. And another set of parentheses, IP, comma port. Okay, so now that we know we can connect to it, what we need to do is accept messages from the server. So I'm going to do all this in a infinite while loop. Can't type true. So our message is going to be client socket dot receive, and basically the receive takes in a parameter which tells it how big are the chunks that we're receiving. So I'm just going to give a big value here, which is 1024, but you can receive small chunks if that satisfies your need. Next thing I'm going to do is actually create another variable, which would be the decoded message. Actually no, I'm just going to do inside the print statement. So I'm going to print out what we've just received. Print f-string, and the server said server said message, and now we're going to decode the message. So decode, and since we encoded it in UTF-8 format, we're going to decode it in UTF-8 format. And as you can see, we've got an error here, which comes from the fact that we're using parentheses inside the f-string. So whenever you're using parentheses inside an f-string, you need to make sure that the parentheses, am I saying parentheses? The codes the codes need to be double quotes. Double quotes. So now the error goes away, and now I'm going to save it. And now we need to run both the files. So what I'm going to do is open up the terminal, and we need two of them for the server and the client. So I'm going to open two, and in the first one, and because we are in this directory, we need to move to the main folder inside the venv. So I'm going to move over to there. cd venv, cd main, and if you do ls here, we can see both our files are in here. And I'm going to run it. So I'm going to say server.py, and that's now running. You won't see anything until we connect. So let's just move over to venv main, Whoops. ls, can't type really. Client, okay, so as soon as we run the client, it says the server said welcome to the dark side. So because the server was already running and listening on that port, as soon as the client connected to it, the server sent it the message, and on the server side you can see it says the address is now connected. So this is what the address variable holds when the server socket accepts any sort of connection. So that'll be it for this video. Thanks for watching.